So how does anxiety gradually increase? This is something that you have to understand. Test anxiety is not something that just happens during the exam. It's actually something that builds over time. And it builds over time unchecked. Meaning, like right now, some of you are studying for the IELTS exam or studying for the TOEFL IBT. And right now, in your study process, your anxiety is building unchecked, which means you're doing nothing about it. And then when you take the exam is the end result of that anxiety building. And so one of the biggest mistakes that students make is that in their preparation process, in their study process, they're not doing anything. They're not practicing or managing their test anxiety or learning how to do it. And so a lot of you are walking in there at an increased level. So in looking at how anxiety ratchets up, right? As soon as you register for the exam and begin your preparation, the anxiety starts. Then you might start thinking about why the exam is required. Then during your practice, you might be getting some poor practice results. Anxiety's building. Then you have some pre-exam student comments from other students that have no idea what they're talking about, or people putting more pressure on you, or you're getting pressure from parents, right? Pre-exam student comments or comments from others. And then this anxiety peaks right before the exam, and then during the exam, there's a catastrophic failure. And a lot of people don't understand that it's a building process. Now, some of you are caught in a kind of test anxiety cycle. Like I have a lot of students that have taken the IELTS exam 6 times, 5 times, 4 times before they get to me, right? It's very rare that after I teach somebody, they have to take the test exam again. Not unless they just are trying to really achieve super marks. Like I have some students that get on the IELTS exam, they get an 8, and they're like, I want to take it again because I want a 9. Okay, great. More power to you. Or I have students on the TOEFL that do the same thing. But there are people that before they come to me, and there's some of you in this class right now that have taken the exam twice, 3 times, 4 times already. So what ends up happening is, in terms of a cycle, you have a test failure. Because of that test failure, you have test anxiety. Because of that anxiety, you can't study effectively. Then you're under or unprepared for the exam. Then you have more test anxiety. Then that interferes with your test performance when you take it again. And so for those of you that have taken the exam more than once, 2 times, 3 times, you're going through this anxiety cycle over and over again. And so if you took the test before and you failed, right? Right here, right after that failure, that's when you need to start breaking your anxiety. You have to start breaking it. You have to start getting control over it, or else you're going to get caught in that cycle. So how do we recognize test anxiety? This is really important because most of us kind of know how to recognize it. But in your practicing, in your study, in your practicing during the exam, it's critical that you recognize when the anxiety is starting, because you don't want it to overwhelm you. So when you see these signs, it's important that whatever technique you're using, you employ it right then. Get control over the monster before the monster eats you alive. So when we talk about recognizing test anxiety, you want to ask yourself a few questions. Do you experience fear, anxiety, or helplessness before or during a test? Do you procrastinate on your studying because you fear performing badly? Have you performed poorly on a test in the past and fear repeating the performance? Do you blank out or have trouble concentrating during an exam? If you say yes to any degree, to these questions, then most likely you suffered to some level of anxiety. So in terms of the symptoms, you have some physical symptoms, and then of course you have some emotional symptoms. In terms of the physical, if you start sweating, nausea, losing focus, increased heartbeat, short breath, freezing, your mind goes blank, headaches, that's a physical sign that anxiety is getting hold to you. If you're feeling impending doom, self-doubt, fear, stress, hopeless, feeling inadequate, panic attacks, those are some of the affective or the emotional signs that anxiety is starting to take you over. And when this starts, the earlier you catch it, the easier it is to control. So some of you were asking me a question earlier about what's the zone? Where do you want to be? Everyone needs some stress to perform at their peak. I told you that. If you could sit down and have a conversation with Michael Jordan, he would tell you, yeah, I feel stress. Of course I do. Of course Ronaldo feels stress. Messi feels stress. Beyonce feels stress. But where you want to be is right, you can see the peak right here. This is where you want to be, right? You don't want to have no stress, because if you have no stress, then you're not going to reach the peak. Performance is where the stress exists. And then, of course, the problem is that some people go over the peak and they go down into extreme anxiety. But a little bit of nervousness is helpful. What it does is it makes you mentally alert and ready to tackle the challenge. There is a direct link between your arousal or your anxiety and performance. However, like I said, if it keeps increasing, like it ratchets up and you're not able to hold it right here, you have to hold it here. See, a lot of those students that are getting an 8 to 9 on the IELTS or getting a 26 plus on the TOEFL, they're able to hold it right here. For many students that are not getting those marks, what happens is it goes up, it keeps going up, it goes into the Goldilocks zone, and then it keeps on, it increases more. So once it crosses the line, that's when it starts to interfere with your test performance. That's when that extreme or excessive fear makes it a challenge for you to concentrate. Then you struggle, you can't recall your strategy, and then you start wasting time and other types of negative actions begin to happen. So that's what I was talking about in terms of the zone. The goal is not no stress. The goal is maintaining stress in the Goldilocks zone. So what's the impact of test anxiety? Test anxiety impacts two types of students. It impacts high achiever students and also unprepared students. The unprepared students, everybody's clear on. Everybody knows, well, you're in the exam, you didn't study, you're not prepared, so of course you feel anxiety. But then you also have the high achiever students. You have the students that have in university, they've gotten excellent grades all their life. They're high achievers. They have high expectations of themselves, and they're perfectionists. And whenever I have a student that's a perfectionist, I get worried because perfectionism is a big, big hindrance to doing well on this exam. You have to recognize that if you are a high achiever student, that you have certain traits that are going to make it more likely for you to suffer from anxiety problems. Most of the time, it comes from you putting pressure on yourself. And so, you have to really be able to know who you are, and then knowing that, start working on managing your anxiety. So, test anxiety affects you during the test, prior to the exam. It inhibits your ability to recall or use information. And then very often, anxiety has the impact of giving you a poor understanding and association of the content. So the impact of anxiety, when you talk about something inhibiting your ability to recall or to use information, that directly impacts your performance on the IELTS or on the TOEFL exam. If you're not able to have an understanding and association of the content and the questions, that directly impacts your performance. A lot of you are not doing well because of anxiety. It has nothing to do with a lack of strategy. So many times students think there's something they don't know. And what they don't know is they don't know themselves. They don't realize, I have this thing over here that if I just take care of that, my score will increase. So let's talk about some general causes of test anxiety. Common causes: fear of failure. That's a big one. Prior bad test experience is big. The running clock. TOEFL or IELTS deal with that clock running that increases anxiety. That's why I recommend to students over and over and over again, simulate the exam, simulate the clock. Stop being in a fantasy land. Too many students, I see it all the time, doing listening or doing reading without a clock, doing writing without a clock. And then they always say, okay, later on, I'll start. It's like, no, you have to simulate that. It's not something that you just simulate 1 week before the exam. The threat of evaluation is the big cause, overthinking the exam, and of course, not being prepared. Some uncommon causes. Some causes you may not have heard or considered that can result in increased anxiety. Number one, wanting to be right. These are my perfectionists. These are my perfectionists right here, wanting to be right. You won't believe how much wanting to be right causes you to be wrong. Forgetting, or more importantly, not trusting your techniques. I have a lot of students, and some of the students that don't do well are students that don't trust their technique. Like, they'll use the techniques that I teach them in practice, and they get really good results in practice. Then they get in the real exam, and they don't trust their technique. They start overreading, overthinking, searching, trying to find out why wrong answers are correct, right? Not trusting techniques. That increases your anxiety. Room intimidation. Listening to idiots' bad advice. poor study habits, and not able to let go. What I mean by not able to let go is you find the right answer choice, and then you're not able to let go and move on to the next question, right? You're not able to let go. Your anxiety increases. So then when your anxiety increases, you start checking for bad answers or checking for wrong answers or trying to figure out how to make a wrong answer right. All that happens because of these anxiety increasing elements. All right, so before I move on and talk about a couple other things, are there any questions? I've been speaking for a while, and I want to take any questions right now about anything that I've mentioned so far. Everybody, in terms of the directions, this class is going to be, I've said before, the class is going to be recorded, okay? But I don't see any other new questions. So, all right, Manuel. Manuel knows himself. I've been talking about being a perfectionist, and Manuel has a question because he says he's a perfectionist. So, Manuel, go ahead and ask your question, and then I'll come back to the chat box later on and answer your question. Okay, Manuel?